Barnacles are a group of mostly sessile crustaceans, meaning that they don't move. They attach themselves to rocks, boats, whatever it may be, and then use the passing water as their food source that brings particulate matter so that they can eat. They have a cuticle that is hardened into a shell that acts as kind of the exoskeleton, the protective barrier from them in the outside. Here's kind of what they look like. You obviously see that cuticle there, and this is the actual living organism in there. They're kind of filter feeders. You can see they have their appendages out there, and they're waiting for things to come by that they can grab onto and eat. The edge of these shells is actually very, very sharp. If you ever run into a barnacle, barnacles can take a good chunk out of your leg, whatever it is. All right, sea stars and other echinoderms. Echinoderms, I don't know, when I see echino, I think of spiny. If you've ever felt a sea star or a starfish, they actually feel very spiny. So the phylum Echinodermata may seem to have little in common with phylum Chordata, which includes the vertebrates, but we actually see some shared characteristics with all of these, or with some of them in each group. So shared characteristics define deuterostomes. They have radial cleavage, which means that looking down from the top you can cut them a number of different ways and find equal parts on both sides. And the formation of mouth at the end of the embryo opposite to the blastopore. So it develops anus to mouth, which is what we've talked about as far as deuterostomes. Protostomes develop mouth to anus. Sea stars and most other echinoderms are slow-moving or sessile marine animals. Sessile, I don't know if I wouldn't refer to many of them as sessile. They just move so slowly that it looks like they're not moving. A thin epidermis covers an endoskeleton of hard calcium plates is basically what it comes down to. They're kind of rigid as far as their body feels, but their legs allow for a pretty good degree of motion. Echinoderms have a unique water vascular system, which is a network of hydraulic canals branching into tube feet that function in locomotion, feeding, and gas exchange, which is kind of interesting. So basically those little feet on the underside allow for pretty much every life force that they have. They're able to move, they're able to feed through them, they're able to exchange gas through them. It all kind of runs through this tube foot system, which is kind of interesting. Males and females are usually separate, and sexual reproduction is external, meaning they lay eggs and then fertilize them outside. And here's kind of the basic plan for them. Obviously, these gonads would be producing eggs. You can see the stomach here in the middle. The cool thing about their stomach is that when they digest things, they actually expel their stomach out onto what they're trying to digest, and the enzymes will break it down. They're able to absorb some nutrients through that stomach lining and into the rest of their body, which is kind of cool. You can see the anus comes out on the top of the body, and that central disc is basically that sometimes it's an invisible circle, sometimes it's very visible. An invisible circle that kind of surrounds the digestive tract and then would eventually lead out into their legs. So interesting stuff. Alright, living echinoderms are divided into 6 classes. You have your sea stars, your brittle stars, your sea urchins, and sand dollars, sea lilies, leaf stars, sea cucumbers, and then sea daisies. We'll see some pictures of these all individually here as we go through. Here is again, a nice chart. You're going to want to know these charts. Probably the easiest way to study all this information is by the charts rather than going through slide by slide or through your notes. This kind of wraps everything up into a nice package that you can find pretty easily accessed. Alright, sea stars, asteroidea, have multiple arms radiating from a central disk. Usually 5, sometimes more, sometimes less. The undersurface of the arms bear tube feet, like we talked about, kind of the exchange center for food, locomotion, and gas exchange, each of which can act like a suction disc. So they actually latch on to a substrate and use motion of that tube foot to move themselves. Sea stars can regrow lost arms, which is kind of an interesting thing. If you cut one off, it'll grow it back. But usually, if you don't have any of the central disc in that segment, that other segment that fell off won't develop into anything. So here's a sea star. You've all probably seen them before. Right in here, again, this is difficult to see, but right in here would be what we refer to as the central disc. That's the essentially digestive tract. Brittle stars have a distinct central disc, very distinct central disc. You can actually see this very pronounced. Long flexible arms, which they use for movement. Of them. In most cases, this is a pretty small one with relatively few, but you can get them to have 15, 20 of those legs, and this is the very defined central disc that we're talking about. So the kind of differences that we see here between the brittle stars and the sea stars. Sea stars have much more robust, thick legs, whereas brittle stars, they look a little bit more frail because they have such thin legs. Sea urchins and sand dollars have no arms, but have 5 rows of tube feet. So when you see a sand dollar, it kind of looks like there's a sea star on a plate, is what it looks like. And that sea star on a plate, that's the tube feet that they have for locomotion. So we can kind of look at what those all look like. So we can see they don't actually have legs, they just kind of radiate out of this central body, and that's used for motion and grabbing onto things and gas exchange, similar things to what we saw with the sea star. It's just all condensed into one, usually circular structure, or spherical in the case of the sea urchin. Sea lilies live attached to the substrate by a stalk, so they actually almost look a lot like plants. But the feather stars can crawl using long, flexible arms. They basically reach out, attach to the substrate, and they're able to propel themselves forward. Again, this is a real slow process, and if you were to watch it, it would be incredibly boring. But it's kind of a cool thing. This, animal that looks a whole lot like a plant, but behaves like an animal and does things like an animal, feeds itself, that sort of thing. Cool thing to look at. So this would be an example of that. I mean, it looks just like a bunch of fiddleheads for ferns and stuff, but this is actually a living animal. And this is the feather star. I mean, they look like feathers. You can see that. Sea cucumbers, or sea pickles, if you like. They lack spines. They don't have those tube foot types of things or anything like that. Have very reduced endoskeletons. They're very soft, do not look much like any other echinoderm. They just kind of look like these gigantic, soft, slug-looking things. The sea cucumbers have 5 rows of tube feet. Some of these are developed as feeding tentacles, and we'll see here. You can kind of see those little tube feet, those little black dot things. You can see a row, and then there's a row, and over here there's a row. They've got these little rows for interacting with their environment, but they look like a sea cucumber. It's really a pretty good name for them. Pretty primitive type of animal, been around for a long time, but kind of an interesting one as well. Sea daisies were discovered in 1986, and only 3 species are known. Maybe many more out there, obviously, but the ocean's a big place, and we've only discovered 3. And here's kind of what they look like. You can see kind of those interactive tube-looking things, and this is the structure. This is what we're dealing with. So that kind of brings us to the end of our discussion on invertebrates. If you have questions, I'm sure you can ask Kimo. He'll have all kinds of stories. He's taught biology for way longer than I have. So if you have any questions, you can ask him. If you want to hear some stories, that'd be great. Something I'd like for you guys to do, make sure you have all of your summaries ready to go for the exam, which will be on Monday. We will have time at the beginning of the hour for you guys to ask questions and receive some direction on things that maybe you're confused about, and then we'll get right into the exam during the second half. So I hope you all have a great weekend, and be good, say no to drugs, all that good stuff. Okay, thanks. See you later.